Hello and welcome to the ASB Investment Podcast, the show that keeps you up to date on the markets and helps you make smart choices with your investments. These are entirely our own views and that of our guests. It's not investment advice, but we know plenty of experts at ASB that will be happy to chat if you need. Well, hi, and welcome to the latest edition of the ASB Investment Podcast. We have something a bit different for today's show. We explore the big issues and opportunities shaping New Zealand's farming communities. I'm your host, Nigel Grant, and we're going to dive into a unique moment for our rural sector, the significant capital return from Fonterra to its dairy farmers, and what this could mean for the future of rural wealth in Aotearoa. And joining me today is Aidan Gent, GM of Rural at ASB. Aidan, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm excited to be here.
Are you?
It's great. New Zealand's best podcast.
Oh,
good.
Gosh, I didn't know the rural community was so into it. But tell us a little bit more about yourself and kind of, wherever you want to go, and what led you to your current role.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a born and bred dairy farmer. So
are you?
I've got an interest in a 400 cow dairy farm up in Northland, where I spend sort of most weekends when I can.
Most weekends.
So I'm probably one of the few bankers in the car park with a car that's got all sorts of farm stuff over it and in it, and so despite the minority of my career being in rural banking, being a farmer sort of gives a natural empathy for the sector.
The obvious question I'm sure you get asked is, why'd you move from there to here?
The corporate world has always interested me. I think I'd get a little bit too annoying for people around me if I was solely on the farm, and then equally if I was solely in the corporate world without the farm as an escape, I think I'd annoy the living heck out of my team as well. So I enjoy the challenge that running a big business provides, as well as feeling a bit real, sitting behind a cow or on a tractor.
Well, you're like, I guess, the perfect GM of Rural, right?
Some would argue. I'll pass it on to HR.
Let's start with the big news then. This capital return to Fonterra's shareholders and farmers. Walk us through what's happening with this payout and how it works. Why is it such a significant event, and why, I guess, is it kind of happening?
Yeah, it's a really big event. So there's two steps in it. The first is passed, which is the agreement for Fonterra to sell its ownership of the consumer goods business to Lactalis, a French company. The next vote's upcoming in the middle of February, which is then voting for the sale proceeds to be returned by way of capital return.
And when you say vote, when you say vote on that second vote, is that are there choices, or is it just a yay or no?
The choice is either, I guess, as a shareholder, you can choose to have that capital returned, or you can choose that Fonterra keeps that capital and has
reinvest it,
has an eye-wateringly strong balance sheet.
Okay, sure.
To put a quantum around that, the last few years of Fonterra's dividend performance is probably in the order of 4 to 6 times the annual dividend coming through in one payment.
Wow.
To tax-free payment, which is also somewhat appealing for businesses around how you might disperse that. But from a dollar quantum, it represents about 10% of the debt on issue to the dairy sector. So that amount coming back in one day is quite material for regional New Zealand, as well as the few Queen Street farmers that also have interests.
Queen Street. And I guess, so, how rare is a payout of this scale? Have we ever seen anything like it?
No, we haven't. And I guess the history of the cooperative, there certainly has been other asset sales have gone and had some special distributions, but nothing of this scale. And for many farmers, this would be one of the most meaningful lump sum checks they've had ever.
Yeah, right. And I guess because I was just, as you were talking, I was just thinking back to the Craig Norgate days and the setup, and when it all came together, and always tried to make the brands business work. And I guess that, noting what you can and can't say, obviously, because of your ties, but is it kind of like they're going in a different direction?
I think they're going down the route of what New Zealand does exceptionally well, which is adding value to products that global players want to buy. So a lot of their specialty ingredients, where they might be making, shelf-stable cream for the Asian food service market, or super high-end nutraceuticals to feed to babies in America, that part of their business we are world leading in. The FMCG side, that's horribly capitally intensive, and there's some really big global players. So if I put my farmer hat on, it feels like they're getting back to what they are world leaders in, which is really exciting. And
there's been a bit of talk in terms of, we should, or some from various parties on, don't give up on this bit and we can win in there. But I guess what I thought, which is kind of interesting, there surely is a sweet spot where, as you're saying, it's like what we do well, you can still add value even more to that bit, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's a key decision point for any business is, what are you best at, and how do you leverage the heck out of what you're best at? So, if you look at the innovation teams that Fonterra's got in Palmerston North, they are world class at what they create and the value that they add to the exports that leave our shores. So I think that's why you've seen, from my perspective, such a strong turnout of farmers voting for this.
And to finish up on that point, I guess there's broad consensus, or you'd be in the minority if you weren't for it.
Yeah,
obviously,
it was high 80s percent voted for it, which is not a bad turnout.
And I guess with such an influx of capital, to state the bleedingly obvious, farmers now have a big decision to make, I guess. What are some... I guess, how are you and your team helping? But what are some of the key questions they've got or options farmers have to think about with this influx of funds coming in?
First of all, it is a lot of money, right? So for a smallish farmer, you're probably still getting a couple of $100,000. Large farmers, you're in the millions.
And what's a smallish farm?
So if you've got 300 cows,
okay, that's
as an example, so if you're the average herd size in New Zealand, which is a touch over 300 cows, you're probably getting $150,000 back.
Yeah, it's material.
All the way through to the big corporates are getting far larger checks. I think the way that people are starting to talk about it is twofold. One, how do I build resilience into my existing business? So be that strengthening your balance sheet, or be that investments on farm for infrastructure or repairs. I guess as farmers are getting older, you're seeing wealth transfers to future generations become more of a topic over and above just succession. I think we're starting to see a lot of off-farm investment conversations starting to flow through from our teams, and we're certainly out there talking to them about that.
And when you say, I guess to press on that point, off-farm investment conversations, meaning like it's you haven't seen this before, or it's kind of like it goes in cycles and it's now happening again?
Traditionally, farmers have invested in their land, right? It's the asset in front of them. Yeah. There's as much emotion often tied to those assets because they're multi-generational as there is the logic of those investment decisions. And because of the type of investment class they hold, they like to see a physical asset. That's why you won't see them go and punt Aussie equities as much.
Invest in Aussie equities.
Invest in Aussie equities.
Yeah.
That's absolutely correct. But some farmers are getting to the point that they don't want their farms to get any bigger. They might have, for a whole bunch of reasons, they might be quite happy with how their farm is currently set up today. And so we're starting to see conversations around residential property, commercial property. We're fortunate with an ASB that we've got access to the ASB Wealth platform, which has got some amazing tools for our farmers to manage wealth. There's a lot more breadth in that conversation than what there would have been 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, but more siloed view. But are there any other things that farmers should probably consider when deciding how to use these funds? I guess, is there something that they should have, that you'd be giving primacy to, or?
The first one is talking to people. The worst thing you do is rush into any decision.
Which some do, or
I think there is sometimes a risk that you feel like you need to make a decision. The money's burning a hole in your pocket. I've personally tried to buy a boat with what might be coming my way, but I don't think that's going to quite fly because I made the mistake of talking. But no, look, I think there's the opportunity to set your family and your family's wealth up for a generation with a check of this quantum if it's applied the right way. So. Sure. Taking the time, talking to your trusted advisors is very important.
And is there any, I guess, whether it's the same answer or not, but are you seeing farmers ask about, for those who are having conversations with, balancing short-term versus long-term needs? Is anything coming through there? I
think farmers historically have done a great job sort of, I guess, almost saving for that rainy day or setting the business up for that more medium or longer term outlook. And
because it's always coming.
It's always coming, right? There's always, if you've got a high commodity price, by definition, it being cyclical, there will be a low commodity price. If you've got high interest rates, there will be low, vice versa. And so I think you've naturally had that mindset from a lot of farmers around that win today, win tomorrow. How do I set things up for the future? We see the same conversation come through when we start talking about building generational wealth, is how do you actually build wealth? Your children, your grandchildren are able to take over, continue growing with all the right values and behaviours that go with it.
And I guess that's a really interesting point. Was it in generations prior that conversation around children's children was on the farm? Is it now potentially a bit less siloed? It could just be our family's position, but it doesn't have to be in the paddocks.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Historically, farmers had no choice really because their asset base wasn't what it is today.
Yeah.
And so it was often the chosen son or daughter that took over the farm, and then the rest sort of dealt with their luck. That equally, though, is shown to also prove to be golden handcuffs because you've got the emotional connection to or ownership of being that generational owner of that asset. And so we're starting to see a bit of a split in conversation now from succession within the farming asset itself, so the land, versus the transfer of that generational wealth. And as these businesses are getting bigger, and it doesn't necessarily need to be significantly large, like it could be having a second house in town or a managed portfolio somewhere that provides another wealth vehicle to think about transferring. So the thing you're transferring is beyond just someone to turn up and look after that landed asset.
Yeah, and take over those 3 a.m. starts
Exactly right.
I mean, you're going to laugh at me because I always, 7 o'clock on Sundays, country calendar, and I know it's not the perfect example of what's happening out there, but you see those wonderful stories where maybe mum and dad or, they'd built it and then the new generation just didn't want to do the same, but they've evolved the business, like they're producing these other little things, satellite in and around. It's a lovely kind of continuation story.
Yeah, and we're seeing some great examples of multiple family members coming back and working within the same asset and, each having components of that business that they manage themselves. That's quite special to see, and so giving additional layers of purpose, but also diversifying the revenue streams of those farms. We know that, if I compare to a trip I took with some customers and industry professionals to Singapore earlier last year, really highlighted that in New Zealand we have an abundance of land but a relative scarcity of capital. You go to somewhere like Singapore, they've got an abundance of capital and an incredible shortage of land. So the mindset shift that comes when you can apply, almost your mindset needs to evolve from I'm a sheep and beef farmer to I'm a custodian of 1,000 hectares. Well, gee whiz, there's a lot of things you can do with 1,000 hectares. Yeah. And so we are certainly seeing a lot of that wealth transfer turn into lots of children coming home and setting up 3 different ventures within the same umbrella of that farming asset.
Ownership, keeping it in the family, but I guess you're charting your own destiny. If we talk about the bigger picture, I guess we have just been talking a little bit about it, but passing on farms to the next generation is that ongoing challenge. Why do you think succession planning is so tough? We've kind of talked about some of the ways, inadvertently that are being done to preserve that, but why is it so tough?
Anytime you're dealing with emotion as well as logic, it is really, really challenging. And when you've got a generational farming asset, there is as much emotion tied to that decision as there is logic.
Yeah.
On top of that, you can't cut a farm in half. And so it's not like a managed fund where you can split the thing a few different ways. Yeah. And so you also have this challenge around equity versus equality. You might have had one child that's been on the farm, also helping care for mum and dad, has been putting a bit of sweat equity into improving that property, and another one that's been sitting in a seat in Auckland enjoying life. Well, that means that what's perceived as fair when it comes to succession is also a challenge. We often talk about making sure there's decisions that mean the family still has Christmas together, because that's the one thing that we see.
That's a lovely way of,
where it can go really wrong is when that family no longer has Christmas together because it's broken it up. It tends to be broken up because of the emotional drivers far more than the financial ones.
And which only a family can kind of...
Only a family can work through. And then you add in the in-laws and you add in the all the different perceptions, and it can become quite a melting pot of bad news if you don't manage it the right way.
And I guess potentially with this exceptional event bringing in a windfall or thing that potentially can compound those issues if they're not being addressed successfully.
And I think that's coming back to your earlier question around the long-term perspective of, we are certainly encouraging our farmers to think about their long-term aspirations, 5, 10, 15 years out. And how do you set up your business and your family's wealth portfolio to be where it needs to be in 5, 10, 15 years' time?
Yeah.
Because that might not be building a new hay shed or a new cow shed.
So I guess one thing, taking it back to kind of the investing podcast theme, what parallels do you think there are between investing and farming? I guess I'm thinking of some of the most impressive farming stories or clients, or you've experienced when you were in a suit and you were back on the farm. I guess, what are things, are there any key parallels that strike you between the two?
I think at its core, you're trying to realise value. And realising value means you're focusing on what the key drivers are within your business or within your portfolio to achieve that, and not letting vanity get in the way. So if I look at some of New Zealand's most successful farmers, I wouldn't take the rich list as gospel, because there's many out there that have got hundreds of millions of dollars sitting behind them that you wouldn't know, because they've still got an old Hilux that they pull up to the pub in.
That's intentional.
But it's very intentional. Yeah. But how and most of them have built that wealth themselves. Like New Zealand's wealthiest farmers come from nothing. It's not a case of turning mum and dad's 5 million into 6 million.
Yeah.
And so the ability to focus on the core drivers of performance in your business and be ruthless in your decision making around what drives value is the first. The second one, vanity can get in the way of thinking about investing a stock you feel like you need to have because everyone else at the barbecue had that stock. If that's in farming, it's your neighbour's bought the nice tractor or the nice new cow shed, and you feel like you need that as well. And so
keeping up with the Joneses,
or the or whoever the neighbour may be. The need to be ruthless on those decisions is a big part of it. And the final one is having a go. It's easy to admire success from the sidelines, but you need to get some skin off your knuckles, and you need to, I think, actually to go through that process. So no different to investing. The hardest step you make is when you start your first portfolio. It's the same in farming. The hardest step you take is when you buy your first cows, buy your first block of land. You got to start somewhere.
And I guess to take it back a little bit to the family anchor, I guess, whether it's the generational succession conversation or with this incoming dividend, or whatever you want to call it, are there any, I guess, first steps or advice, notwithstanding it's not personalised advice, but advice you're giving to families to start those conversations, apart from just basically start having them?
The big things we talk about, one, no two farms are the same, no two families are the same. So just because an answer's worked for one person doesn't mean it will work for the next. So often people feel like they need to do what the right thing is. What did next door do? What's the general consensus? Then the other one is really understanding what the drivers of that family's values, beliefs, goals are. That answer will be different because of each of those steps. Having the right people around the table, making sure everyone's aware of the decision you're making, why you're making it, not rushing into it.
Yeah, I can imagine if stakeholders feel like this is the only family dinner we're going to have on it, it's not good.
No, exactly right. Or if it's sort of a Clayton's vote where they feel like they're there to make up the numbers and the decision's already been made. So
it is Clayton's vote, isn't it, that saying?
Yeah.
I've always thought it's that, but I've never had anyone else use it.
Well, that's two of us now, so let's take it as gospel.
Great. Okay, great. Like a choice that's actually not a choice, right?
Yeah, exactly
okay, great.
right.
Okay, I'm going to start using it more in meetings. Okay. Keep going back to the point you made, which was don't feel rushed.
Don't feel rushed. And then I think there is a role for advisors to highlight the options that are out there. Like a lot of farmers won't have had the opportunity to think about, what would I do with another couple of $100,000, because that hasn't been an immediate option for them, especially when that money, and it's probably worth reminding people, is over and above what's already a pretty high payout. So there's already some good cash floating around the system.
Yeah.
Farmers, by and large, outside of a couple of industries, are doing quite well at the moment. So this is over and above that.
Yeah.
And so some of these options wouldn't have been on the table 5 years ago. So opening people's eyes to what is out there is quite an important step.
And not to plug it too much, but I guess just quickly on have a conversation, your team and members of it would basically be the first point of call, right? If someone's worked with, let alone a wealth or investment advisor, start with your team.
Absolutely. And so, we've got people from Whangarei down to Invercargill. They're on the road every day. They're actually measured by the number of farm walks they do, so how often they're actually physically out on farm, although some of them are Hilux walks, not farm walks.
It's still there.
They're still there, actually understanding those drivers of value and the emotive drivers as well. And so if you can start there, our team will often, from an ASB perspective, we'll also take out the right wealth professional as and when's needed, but also bringing your accountant, your lawyer, your family around that table. And it's not a one-time conversation. We've been having this conversation with our farmers for several months now. On this topic, but years on the broader topic, but on this distribution for the last number of months, and that'll continue all the way up until March or April.
I can imagine for a brother-in-law's a dairy farmer. I can imagine that to a farmer, it's a long conversation, and that trust is earned. So if someone's knocking on your door saying, "Hey, I'm here about the Fonterra payout."
If you can sell something to a farmer, you can sell it to anyone,
right?
Because there's no shortage of salespeople going up the driveway, but equally there's no shortage of skepticism on the other side. You've got to remember, a well-run farming business doesn't spend money, so cost control is a big driver of part of our position. Being a low-cost producer of high-quality commodities is not spending money. The other part of it too is, it's one conversation at a local level, but if you think about the macro impacts for New Zealand, $3.2 billion flowing into the economy is somewhat helpful at the moment. So I think we're also going to see quite an upsurge in sort of regional confidence as a result of, almost regardless of whether or not this money goes into on-farm reinvestment on infrastructure, or if it goes into investments, be that funds or property, we're going to see money flowing through regional New Zealand, and that's pretty exciting.
That's awesome, And so with the rural New Zealand perspective, that's... Well, I say probably you might correct me, but it feels like it's changing. Markets, climate, all new themes and topics that people have to battle with. How important is it for farmers to innovate and diversify? And are there any common barriers to doing that?
It's critical. As a farming sector, we've spent generations innovating and adapting. And there's no way anyone farms today like their father did or like their grandfather did.
Right.
And so I think sometimes there's a bit of a stigma when people talk about you need to innovate on farm, when the reality is that's what's happened for generations. It's critical for a couple of reasons. One, we know that land is changing, but also there's a lot more value you can get from different ways of farming today.
Okay.
We did a study through Lincoln University on the future use of land and how we fund it, because there's been a lot of stuff on how New Zealand could adapt its land, very little on how you fund it. Obviously, capital is a big requirement there. What that showed, just to give an illustration, if we could improve the productivity of our sheep and beef farms by 10%, just 10%, it would do two things: deliver $10 billion to our GDP within 5 years, and reduce our hidden environmental costs of farming by 10%. And so there's some huge opportunities out there.
So produce more, but be kinder to the land under it.
Correct. And so there's some huge opportunities out there. There's two things that are holding it back. One is actually access to the right advice, the right types of people having that conversation. And then the second one is the access to the capital. So we know for some farmers would be typified in the sheep and beef sector by being asset rich but cash poor.
Yeah.
And so how do you help unlock that capital? We know there's, to quote, I can't remember who used the quote, but we can't leverage our way to prosperity in New Zealand either. So how do you think about the right capital flows coming in to unlock this latent potential we have in our land?
And I guess think about your Singapore example. I'm sure finding the right partners that are long-term custodians and we want to be partners in that 10% uplift type thing.
Absolutely. And you do see some of, I guess, the pension fund type examples where they tend to have a longer term investment horizon. It's probably not a PE play, but it certainly is for those more long standing capital providers.
And I guess you're sort of looking for potential. I guess I look at you, and you are a farmer who happens to also be banking at the moment. I'm sure but it's almost like I'm just wondering what people out there are also like investors, like guardians of the capital, but also I'm a lover or I'm an actual farmer as well. I'm not sure who are those people.
It'll surprise you who they are.
Right.
We've, even the approaches I get in my day job as a banker, although to your point, I'm not sure which one. I'm not sure if I'm a good banker or a good farmer, but I get to do both.
Well, you've hedged, you've diversified, right?
Yeah. Although as you would well know, diversification means I probably shouldn't be then the GM of Rural if I'm trying to diversify away from agri exposures. But you talk to some of the family offices out of Europe as an example.
Yeah.
They all come over and talk about the 30 or 50 year outlook for our food and fibre sector. Like there's a long-term need to feed the world in a way that does it that's sustainable for the planet. We've got a competitive advantage in New Zealand to continue to do more of that. So those people are out there, but then equally within the farming system in New Zealand, there are a number of very, very wealthy families now that are getting well beyond sort of family office scale of wealth.
Yeah.
And so you're now seeing some of their investments be targeted back to the next generation or helping unlock some productive capacity in a farming business where they're partnering with the right people or human capital side of things, and they're providing the equity capital on the other side. You're starting to see a lot of within agri investment going on from some of these wealthier families as well.
Yeah, and I can imagine we've got the capital sorted. We're not going to turn up at your farm and tell you how to plant or milk. You're the expert.
Absolutely, no different to although plenty of people try and tell us how we should be banking, but our role is to ultimately assess the risk within businesses and help farmers understand where both the risk and therefore the opportunity sits.
And to wrap up, are there anything else, I guess, tell us more about how ASB Rural is helping farmers? Are there any other key things that you and the team are helping people navigate?
One of the lucky things, I guess, being in this role is I sort of feel like I've got the keys to the cookie jar because, being both a farmer and then a person providing a fair bit of capital to the farming sector, we've made a conscious call to help accelerate New Zealand's progress, and we've done that in a couple of ways farming recently. One, we know that on-farm electrification is really, really important, both for regional resilience in New Zealand, but also for cost savings. If Gabrielle had hit when we had some farms electrified, you wouldn't have had Tairāwhiti be cut off from power for so long because the local farmers could have electrified. We've got propositions out there on solar, including some awesome calculators online for farmers to electrify. Things like our Every Hectare Matters proposition, which is trying to help provide capital to those farmers who are typified by being asset rich, cash flow poor, where we'll actually pay the upfront consultancy advice up to $30,000 for a consultant to come and work on your farm around how you can optimise your land and make every hectare matter.
Productivity
Sort of play. Yep. Ultimately, though, our role is to be out there, boots on the ground alongside our farmers, understanding what the sector needs and providing those solutions. We've been the largest growing lender to the agri sector in the last 12 months, and that's something we're very proud of.
You strike me as, to state obvious. You strike me as very excited by the kind of opportunity. Like, and
there's no better industry in New Zealand, though. What would you rather be in? All jokes aside about diversification, I think food and fibre is one of New Zealand's very few genuine competitive advantages.
Yeah.
Yes, we're going to have to evolve how we grow it, and we're going to have to evolve what some land is used for. But I think the enduring piece here is that food and fibre as a strategic theme is one of the pieces they can't take away from us. We ultimately in New Zealand turn, I like to say, sunshine, water, and soil into food or fibre in less steps than most other parts of the world.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I guess you can't shift a farm.
You can't shift a farm. You can't make an expensive property cheap to run either. So if you think about the global landscape, most other countries are reliant on some form of government subsidisation to produce food and fibre at a price point we can do without any government intervention.
You can't make an expensive farm cheaper.
You can't make an expensive farm cheap to run. Like, that's just if it's
you could make it like, I guess you could maybe tinker.
You can tinker, but structurally, you can't change your soil, you can't change your location, you can't change your climate. So your bed's made as soon as you hop into it.
And I guess one final, that Singapore trip, we probably take it for granted here, right? Like all the farmers and you drive past them on your way to wherever you're going around the country. But is it that international people you meet with look down here and go, wow?
They go well on two fronts. One, just the sheer scale of expansive outdoor farming, which is also beautiful. It looks like a postcard when you drive around it. But to give you a flavour of the scale, went to a farm in Singapore, 200 square metres. Like, my house is larger than this individual's farm. A vertical farm, and they're finding a way to integrate solar panels, fish farming, and vertical farming for like lettuce and stuff for restaurants, and using the solar to heat the glass house, but at the same time the output of heat is cool, so that they cool the water then runs through all of the lettuce plants
down into the
fish. The fish are then swimming in nutrient dense water, so they need less food. You get two things coming out the back of that: tasty fish and clean water. But they're doing all of that within a couple of 100 square metres.
Wow.
And so when they hear about on my farm, I'd have a larger area where I park my tractors than that. So when they look at our scale, they're absolutely envious with the possibilities that are in front of us. And I guess that's maybe why I come across as somewhat excited about the sector, because we've got the world in front of us.
Yeah, and I guess conversely, people are innovating. Don't not innovate, I guess. Okay, well, that's all we have time for today. To our listeners, if you're a farmer or a part of a rural family, perhaps now's the time to think about, I guess, this next part of your future. Not that there's one decision to rule all steps of your future, but this one's coming in, shortly, and have that conversation around the dinner table. Aidan, any final thoughts or advice for farmers as they consider the next steps?
Be excited about the future. Get a trusted team around you, but there's no better industry to be in, and I'd argue no better bank than ASB to partner with on that journey.
There you go. That's a well-refined pitch. And to the final question we ask all guests, recommendation for something you're reading, watching, listening, doing that you want to share with listeners?
Sure. I mean, I think the advice for you probably needs to be listen to the Country podcast, and you might start to think differently about how you apply your capital. But in all seriousness,
is that the Jamie Mackay one?
Jamie Mackay one.
Yeah. I'm familiar.
In all seriousness, the two, Gilbert Anoka's new book. Loving that.
Yeah.
I quite enjoy studying mindsets and how the brain's wired. And then Brad Smeal's Between Two Beers podcast is something quite incredible about someone who's gone from being an ultra sort of athlete doing X Games and the like to a tetraplegic now and the journey he's been on. So.
Right. My one was as the Vanderbilt Dynasty book by Anderson Cooper. I thought it was. I've just started it, but I thought it was appropriate when we were sort of putting this one together. The American family who built up wealthiest family in America and then lost it all. And I just thought, with that like lineage, family planning and things, you almost like want to take the opposite of what they've done. Yeah.
They often talk about with succession that the first generation creates it, the second generation enhances it, and the third generation loses it, right? So there's a lot of case studies when it goes wrong. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Aidan, and thank you for everyone listening. Farming is at the heart of NZ. We all know that, but there are a lot of parallels between it and investing. We've talked about discipline, long-term view, diversification, navigating through really tough periods on occasion. So there are probably a few things that both investors and farmers can connect on, not to mention learn a thing or two from each other. So with that, again, thanks, Aidan, for coming in. I hope you had a fun time.
It's been awesome. Thank you.
And until next time, happy investing, and I hope the remainder of the NZ summer treats everyone in the regions and our farms, orchards and fields kindly, and it's bye for now. Thanks for listening to the ASB Investment Podcast. If you have any thoughts on this episode, or if there's anything you'd like us to discuss on a future show, get in touch with us at podcasts@asb.co.nz.